as you start this etude, start quietly. It's marked in there by either Segovia or Sor as piano, and it does make a lot of sense, right? So get on your F major chord. 1, 2, 3, right? 1, 2, 3. And on your right hand, you want to be as relaxed as possible. Think of your fingers on the strings as shock absorbers, right? Your thumb just goes in place, right? So you start piano, a little bit louder, you put more weight onto the strings, right? And you get the most weight on that dominant chord, right? You get that B flat in there, right? That really kind of tells you, all right, it's a C7 chord, right? You start in F major, which is a tonic. Get a little bit louder. And then come back quieter to the tonic, right? How does that look in the other hand? Right. Then you have this little run, and it's very important to lead with the left arm as you move forward. And then as you change position, use 3 as your guide finger. Right? That makes it a lot smoother. Come back. Then this is E and C, and it's wonderful to actually get that different sonority of E and C on the 5th fret. Right? In the score it's written, but it's very difficult not to slide, and that's not really in character for the time of Sor, right? It's nicer to just grab a bar right there since you have a rest right after it, right? So let's just play through that. The next phrase starts on G, right? Here you introduce the root, right? That's your 5th fret. And then you just walk back, right? So you have kind of like a descending line at the bass. Right? Again. It's very important to actually land with 2 here, right? So that 1 can be ready to grab the C. Here you jump, you change position to 3rd position, right? And a little word on doing pull-ups, right? You notice how close this part of my hand is to the bottom of the guitar, right? Always try to be as close as possible. You know, a lot of people, when they're learning how to play the guitar, they actually try to get this as far away, and take a look at what happens to the wrist. I mean, you're doing a very nasty bend on your wrist, right? So always try to keep that as close as possible and the wrist as straight as possible, right? And then you actually jump back from there to 1st position, right? Right, so what happens here? You have this crescendo. It's even marked by Segovia or Sor in the score, right? Now, it's quite magical if you are able to hold on to this E there in the bass. Right? It's a little bit more work to set up 2 and 4, right? But this E is going to lead you in step one. Notice that I kept my E there as it led me to the F, right? So that half step motion, right, makes you arrive at the F chord now as you resolve from the B flat to A, right? So that is a big loop around where you're playing what we call, I guess, standing on the dominant. You have a B flat as your highest note, right? That is kind of defining the 7th of the C7 chord, right? You can play all of that. Somebody can just be playing a C7 chord, right? right? Right. Next, you actually have a series of hammer-ons and pull-ups. You start with thirds, but eventually you're going to move on to sixths. Right? So 1 and 2, second string and third string. Open, right? And notice that I'm using index and middle on my right hand, right? Here. And then index and ring for the third and the first string. Right? You have a bit of a skip. You have to land on the 5th fret right there, right? Make sense? Then you bring it back, 5th fret, 3rd fret, 1st string, 3rd string. They're just half stacked. And I always call it half stacked because I have one or more strings in between my fingers. Fully stacked or just stacked is when they're on top of each other, right? So let's actually take a look at the second measure of the third system. And then I'm going to get myself to an F major chord, or a hint of it, with a pull-off, right? It's a suspension that comes in very quickly as a pull-off from the G, right? You want to be very gentle. And as a pull-off, it should actually behave as a pull-down, not pull-off. It's the worst name we could actually give it because it's really not how the technique should work, right? Right, so we set up 1 and 2. Right, and then you have this 3 repeated C's. But it would work so much better with the music if you put a crescendo into it, right? So you arrive here, so arrive quietly. I know it's a downbeat and we want to put stress on the downbeat. Not always. In this case, I don't think it works to our advantage when we're trying to interpret the piece. And from there, make sense? And then this is interesting. You're going to hang on to that C there, right? And as you do that, you have the C major part, right? I have this here. I have the thirds, E and C, right? I'm still hanging on to that C. And then I come back. And as I actually land on that C, I'm going to move my third, C and E, over to a D minor chord, right? It's just a hint of it. It's a passing chord, or passing thirds if you may. And then ascending, right, you get to E and G. He reintroduces the C that represents the dominant there, right? You're still holding on to that C. You really want to hint that that dominant is just lingering there. It dominates, right? Once you start on that tonic, remember we took a step back, right? 1 and 2, 2 and 4, 1 and 3, stacked, 2 and 3, right? Sorry, my camera's a little bit high there. Bar on the 6th position, you're grabbing a G sharp, and then a bar on the 5th. And then you're going to jump right over to 1st position. You're going to lead with your wrist, right? Then get on 3rd position, 1 and 2. Your pinky grabs the C, third string, 5th fret. Right? That's the whole first section. Let's move on to the second section. Right? So you have all of these repeated Cs, and you can do a lot of beautiful things with color, with dynamics, right? You have that dominant, right? C7 going to F, right? And it's not your normal C7, right? It's in first inversion, right? So it's kind of a weak dominant, right? Right, and you arrive again on the downbeat, which normally is your strongest beat, but here, because of the harmony, we have to take a step back, right? We had a dominant, and that dominates that tonic. And that is going to have us take off. I'm getting carried away, right? Very beautiful writing. So we start in the grazioso, right? Dominant, quiet. Gets to third position, you do a pull-off. Pinky grabs the F on the B string. Right? A hammer-on from G to A. And then you grab the reason why I'm not leaving my 1 there is not only because it's a safety, right? I know I'm in third position. I'm going to come back to it when I grab the B flat and pull off to it. Right? You have to be very careful with those pull-offs. You don't want to do that. Right? And you're right back in a tonic. And that's always good to take a step back in a tonic. Right? So we start in the grazioso. Right? So we have that big arrival on A, right? And it could mean many things. So you can say, yeah, that's an arrival on A that is part of the F major chord, which is a tonic, or we could actually be going somewhere else. I see an F sharp in the horizon, right? Right? So we have this chord, right? So kind of like a D7 chord, right? And a D7 chord is always going to be the dominant of G major, right? Right? And when you arrive, the G major has been dominated. It means that the dominant that precedes it, right, resolves quietly to the G major, right? So dominant, right? We have that B flat again. So that B flat only tells you, okay, we're in C7 territory. And it makes sense that you had a G there, which is the dominant of C, right? So you're going down the circle of fifths, really. The second line of the grazioso has you start on an F major chord. You pull off first, crescendo, and this chromatic scale is going to get you to a dominant chord. Here's your dominant. Resolves as a D7 should to a G chord, right? But you have to change position. The second line of the grazioso starts you on the tonic, right? Which means that we should not be too loud. We just had a dominant, and then you take off on a pull-off. Crescendo, chromatics. Now here, you're going to land on a D7 chord. That D7 chord is going to resolve into a G major chord, right? And then this is interesting. You're going to move over to first position on the continuation of the G major chord. As you get this B flat in there, it's a hint of C major, but you're going to for the C's that follow, grab them on a bar to anticipate what is to come, right? So you have your second finger is going to grab the E on the fourth string, right? And then you resolve to an F major chord. And your high F is on the first string, right? And then staying there, you have the high F and you have the fifth string on a B flat. Here, it's interesting. You're going to have to bring your third finger down to the B string, right? And then get 2 and 4 around it. So you now have 2, 3, and 4 stacked on the very same third fret, right? Right, and there's your tonic. That 1 is going to come out of being a mini bar, grabbing the first 2 strings, right? And you have a series of dominant chords, right? Right, so you have an F7 chord, right? And then you have a B minor chord. And then you move up, so you have a G7 chord, followed by an A minor chord. And then you have an A7 chord. And then you just move over, right? Kind of like a G7 chord. Right? So you start on an F major chord inverted, and then that's your C7 chord right before arriving on F. Enjoy the piece. Now let's go ahead and play through it. Enjoy this beautiful piece.